This is one of my favorite episodes of the year because it's an entire episode about my favorite product in 2024, that is Claude AI. This is an episode with Scott White. He is the product leader for Claude, and we get into my daily usage of Claude. I go through all of my use cases. You can steal everything that I do with Claude in this episode. Then we get into, if I'm an enterprise worker, I work in B2B, what are some of the cool things that I can do to integrate it into my work to be way more impactful? And then we talk about how Scott and Claude want to get more people using the product. What are some of the ways that you can start to use Claude, start to use AI if you haven't touched it this entire year? Let's get into today's episode of Marketing Against the Grain. Okay, we're here with Scott White, the product leader for Claude AI, probably my most used product of all time. I was actually
It's your favorite AI product of all time. Let's get real.
It's my favorite product of all time. I use Claude more than any other product that I think I've ever used, outside of HubSpot, of course.
How many hours a day you think you're using Claude?
It's just my daily
existence.
It's just my go-to thing. Like I'm like, oh, I have to do something. I'll go and talk to Claude and then figure out what I want to do. So good job, Scott. You're all building a great product over there.
Yeah, thank you. I think about this a little bit as similarly. Claude to me is a virtual collaborator. That's how I've sort of talked about it internally. And it is spiky at times. Like it is something that I use every day and feels indispensable for me for small things, like even at home, trying to decide movies that I want to watch and getting movie recommendations based on things that I previously liked. Similarly, I do my personal finances, and that's like a spiky thing that happens every once in a while and doesn't. And then there are also things that just really important crucible moments where I need to do a ton of work. And historically, it would have been something that would take me weeks of figuring out my strategy or my pitch for something. But now, Claude having access to all of my content, I can like sit down and actually get something that would have taken me a week to do before done in a day. And it's so flexible in that. But I think this like concept of a collaborator or virtual collaborator sort of spans the entire thing, from something that I just want to have in the background that I can reach out to really easily to answer questions or make progress on something and get unblocked. But also the thing that, you know, I typically would have had to get a group of people into a conference room and like whiteboard something for a week. It's also that depth of collaboration.
What people fail to realize is the more context you give it over a longer period of time, the way more impressive it is. And so maybe the first time you ask Claude for something and give it like one document, it's fine. But then if you continue to use that chat window for a very specific task and just continue, like I basically have many different Claude instances that are singular tasks, and every time I go back to that task, I just go back to that singular chat and give it more context and give it more context. And so I think your opinion of AI changes drastically based upon how long you've used that kind of chat window to actually do that singular task and giving it more context, because the results are like pretty huge in range. And I don't know if that's something you kind of agree with and see as well in terms of how people use AI.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to me, if I break down this concept of a virtual collaborator, it kind of goes into three segments. I think one is what Claude understands about you, about the world, about the situation around what you're trying to do, how Claude communicates with you, and how it understands your preferences, understands how you like to receive information and your outputs, like actually can it display to you, and in what novel ways can it communicate around information to you. And the third is, what is it actually capable of when I want to do something? Can it write a document for me? Can it go and do something in the world for me? You know, not yet, but who knows in the future. What is it actually capable of in terms of taking something that I would have historically had to do off my plate and doing it itself? And I think right now, to me, there's so much opportunity in Claude just understanding more. Obviously, it's a really smart model that has been trained on a lot of information. But like you said, giving it access to more information, increasing its knowledge base about things that are important to you, makes it move from just something that can answer questions to being an indispensable sort of collaborator in your world. And I think like right now you have to go back to these chats. I like use a project, but I also sometimes use chats. I'd actually argue it's still a little too hard to do that. Like you have to have this mental overhead of remembering that you have various tasks, where you go to various places to do these various things. In the future, I'd love Claude to just understand that stuff globally. You don't have to think about the cognitive load of navigating our product and our architecture to figure out where and how you interact with Claude and what it should understand based on what you're trying to do. I would love to move to a world where no matter where and how you're interacting with Claude, it sort of understands the task-specific knowledge that it needs to invoke to do what you want it to do.
One of the things we're actually telling everybody listening and watching today is either through chats or through a feature like projects in Claude, just outline a handful of use cases that you want to just use that assistant in AI for, label them like that from the start, and come back to them anytime you have that use case. It sounds very simple, but people don't really talk about doing that. And that way it's kind of just like a forcing function for you, like, oh, you can easily say, oh, I use Claude for these 5 things. Anytime I'm doing one of these 5 things, I go back and use Claude, and it builds that habit in a very powerful way.
Yeah, you can imagine Claude. I guess the thing you're kind of moving towards, Scott, is like there would be an orchestration layer. So maybe Claude is dividing all of those tasks into subtasks, but you actually don't see it call in those subtasks because there's like a orchestration layer. So you're always interfacing with Claude, and it's doing all of the thing that I do in the background, which is I click on this historical chat, I click on this historical chat for that task, but like eventually Claude will be able to do that part myself. But the thing I wanted to kind of maybe pivot into is because I create so much content in Claude, like there's 2 questions I continue to get asked all the time, which is you should get an affiliate commission for Claude. So I just want to like put it out there, Scott, that people do say that about me. And then the second one is
always making money, Kieran. Nice work.
Yeah, I have to always try to make money. The second one is actually, why is Claude so good, right? Why do you like it? And that one is a hard one for me to answer. So I've like been trying to figure out like, you know, because I can look at the benchmarks and I can see how well it performs and how great it is at all these different tasks, but it's kind of weird. Like you know, I don't think about the benchmarks. I just think about my experience with Claude, and it's hard for me to articulate why I just gravitate towards Claude all of the time. What I would love to hear and maybe start with is you're in a pretty competitive market, like Claude, Google, OpenAI, Grok, when Elon gets his 100K cluster trained and has Grok 3 coming out. And I think everyone is kind of moving in a somewhat similar direction where there's going to be a personal assistant for your life and a personal coworker, or like a knowledge coworker within the enterprise. And so I would just love to hear maybe your perspective on building the product. How do you think about differentiation or how Claude separates itself from what all of the other companies are doing? And I would like to flag that I think you have separated yourself enough that OpenAI have copied you a bunch of times. So I think that's a testament to how great a work that you're doing.
Awesome. Well, as we spin up our influencer marketing motion, I'll make sure to contact you first about that affiliate.
Always be asking.
About that affiliate fee.
That's amazing.
It's a great question. And I think I would go first to the highest level mission of what we're trying to do, which is make safe AI systems the standard and accessible to as many people on the planet as possible. And that's supported in actually a number of different ways within our business. Like we have an API that people can use to implement our models within the software that they're delivering directly to their customers. And that is one way that we are distributing these safe AI models that make it the standard within the world. But it's really important that Claude AI can also be that, because it is the billboard for safe AI, right? It is the way that people think about what this system looks like, how they interact with it, what Anthropic is, what Claude is, and it gives sort of a face and a name to what AI systems that are safe look like in the world. To people that can adopt them themselves without having to be a developer. So it's a really important lever for us getting these systems out to as many people as possible and making them a meaningful part of their lives. So I'll talk about those 2 things I think are important. When I think about Claude being distributed widely and meaningful, one of the key areas that I think about is how it can advance professional development for people. And that's an area where I think we really, really want to focus, is how can Claude be that capable collaborator that I was talking about, especially in a workplace context. And how does it, along the dimensions of what I talked about earlier, what does it need to understand? How can it communicate with you? And what can it actually do for you in the context of your work and what you're trying to do? We want to be at the frontier and excellent at those things. So if I think about advancing on the dimensions of Claude understanding for you and helping you in your job or your role in your professional advancements, you can look at things like the integrations that we've shipped with Google Drive and GitHub and accessing organizational context, allowing for multimodal PDFs and analysis of that content. The model context protocol, which allows you to build flexible ingestion of knowledge into your repositories to then work with. These are all ways that we're very excited for Claude to understand more of the context in your world, especially in the professional environment, to advance and be a better collaborator. And then you can also look at previous things that we've done, like artifacts, helping people create the most meaningful work product outputs, not just answering questions, but actually getting things done that exist in the context of what your role is. And so that is an area that we're very excited about, is advancing professional development through being a better virtual collaborator for those use cases. And I think that there's then like a more mercurial component of this, which is something that you said, like, you don't always know why you want to go back to Claude. And it can be amazing for a use case like content generation because you've put a lot of your content in there historically, and we're uniquely good at content generation with our model. But there is something more mercurial about Claude, the model, in the sense that it is collaborative. It is a virtual collaborator, and it feels that way. And it's like saying, why do I want to go and get a drink with a particular friend? Like, is it because they have a specific job, or I've known them for a specific number of years, or they are someone I look up to because of their professional advancement? No, it's because they're my friend and I like them. There's something to be said about people like Claude. And Claude ultimately is a model that people like spending time with, and being a model that you like spending time with means that you will give it more information. It will be more proactive in working with you, and it will feel more like that collaborative force that you end up doing more meaningful things with. And so that is a component that is harder to see in terms of features that you build, but is a lived experience of how people think about working with the product that's really important to us.
That's actually two good points. So when I think about it, actually, my experience with Claude, because I was obviously, like a lot of people, originally a pretty heavy user on ChatGPT. And what pulled me over to Claude initially was the content creation. It was just much, much better. Was far better writing assistant. Then the thing that you mentioned, which is it was just a better collaborator. I felt it was just like a better fit for me and the way I wanted to kind of go back and forth. And it's interesting, a tool like an AI assistant can be sticky for those reasons, because there's no other product in software you're like, well, I just kind of like feel it's a better fit for me. Like my personality, I work really well with it, where like most software products, the way you decide to use them is quite binary. Like it has the feature set that I want. Whereas because Claude and AI itself is such a broad usage, right? Like you can't distill it into has this feature or that feature. Although I think artifacts was one of the reasons I stuck around for, like, really got me sticky. I love that feature. And so, and if you actually had said to me like, well, how do you think we're differentiation? I would have said, it's pretty obvious you're building for enterprise. Like I feel like the features you're building for enterprise. We have a pretty large squad in HubSpot building AI across all of our go-to-market teams. And that's one of the pods that I lead. So I spend a bunch of time with other companies just learning about specifically how they're applying it to go-to-market, not how they're applying it to like product, because I think that's a pretty common thing for most companies, and it may be a slightly separate thing. And I would still say like the majority of companies are not even at the kind of getting started stage. They're still at the like, what do I even do here? They're doing the prospecting, they're doing the cold outreach. And so what do you think are some meaningful use cases either now or even you think ahead to next year that you think like enterprise companies should seriously consider Claude and AI for?
I think about this on almost two parallel tracks that I've seen. I think there are use cases that exist where Claude is and will continue making people dramatically better and operating faster than they have historically for tasks that are sort of still being done today within these roles. And so here I think about things like content creation, what you were saying before. I've seen a lot of repeatability in marketing teams centralizing a lot of their content around their style guide, their personas, their audiences, and merging that also with product documentation, what they actually support internally, what their products are, the specs that they're writing about things that they want to launch in the future, and merging these things into the actual messaging that you're writing about that product for these various audiences, often internationalized in different countries. Like, these are things that maybe you would have done always, or you wouldn't have done them as well because doing that would be really challenging and require a large marketing team, that you now can do way faster with way higher quality with centralized information. And so there are use cases like that. That also exists for things like sales teams. I did a bunch of user research last week with our sales team. One thing that was really compelling to me was one of our better account executives, one of the best account executives I've worked with. I've actually worked with him at multiple companies. He said, in my old role, I would have made one really good account plan, like strategic account plan, to drive a strategy for winning or expanding an account in a quarter. Like, I would try to have each one of my account executives create like one of those that really could be strategic and hit it out of the park. He's now like, I do 20 with Claude. Like, I've 20x'd the output of like actual strategic account plans that I can prepare for executives to increase their leverage and engagement in my deals. And that's something that I was not able to do historically. I think this also exists in software development, how people are writing code and like Claude writing a lot of the code, understanding a lot of context about your existing code base so that it can help you write that code, and also merge it with internal documentation around what you're building, specific features. Like, these are things that might not exist in a point solution externally that you're using specifically for coding, like in your IDE, but it's actually important to have that context around what you're actually trying to build. So these are a few of the use cases that exist sort of today. The thing that's also parallel to this, though, is it's not just about jobs that are evolving because they have access to this new tool or capability that changes the way they think about it. It's also people expanding their scope at the same time into like other job functions and like the lines becoming blurrier between how job functions are structured because people now have expanded sets of capabilities. So I see things like designers internally writing a lot more code than they typically would have, or they would never have written code before. But now the delta between them being able to push the things that they have in their brain into production is so much smaller. They can now do that. Salespeople helping think about our marketing campaigns and our marketing strategy based on what they're hearing in the field, or synthesizing product feedback from the field that they give into the product team that traditionally like wouldn't have really happened or would have needed specific people to exist in the organization to cross that bridge. But now that bridge is just crossed between those two people. Engineers creating like low fidelity mocks using artifacts to communicate to other people what they want to build and then actually get it prioritized and built. So the thing that's interesting to me also is how these job functions will sort of overlap in Venn diagram circles. And I think we're going to start to see a lot more of that next year as things become more connected and more capable. But I think to also talk about the enterprise thing, I think you're right. Deploying this for professional development means deploying this within businesses. And doing that well also requires like solving for the unique needs of these large businesses, where you can't just now give like everyone access to every tool. You need to be cognizant of security and compliance and administration and permissions and role-based access control as you do these things. So as you're progressing towards this future where job functions look more Venn diagram overlapping, it's actually really important to partner with the enterprises where this change management is going to happen so that you can also build the foundation underneath it to support gracefully moving between those two phases.
Right. I have so many follow-ups, and I'm going to try and stack rank them here in my head because I want to kind of go back to the marketing use case and maybe just show an example of that in action with Claude so people can really understand the value. The thing that you said is that because I'm like looking across the entire go-to-market as AI is being integrated into a bunch of places. And the thing you said about AI actually changes functions, like the roles. It really does, because if you break roles down into a series of tasks and AI can start to do a bunch of those tasks, then a person can actually do a multitude of different roles if they actually understand how to do AI. And then I would love to kind of get into maybe the other thing you said, which is like getting started into the enterprise can be much more complex. And I think part of the problem is this cold start problem. And I wanted to kind of riff on that with you.
Hey everyone, I want to talk about prompting with you today. Being great at prompting is like gives you superpowers. It changes how you can build and work and do everything with AI. And because of that, we wanted to make a special guide just for you around how to get better at prompting framework for how you actually build prompts. And so we've got this baseline framework that you can then go and build and customize any prompts that you want to. You can check it out in the link in the description below. And right now we're gonna get back to today's show.
Going all the way back to the marketing portion here. So we kind of had talked previously before, and I give you a little tee up to one of the things I started with Claude was these kind of writing styles, right? Like I would create these different writing styles, and I truly believe that in the future you won't look at like this email or that email or this blog post or this piece of content. You'll just look at like the performance of different writing styles across your go-to-market, and what kind of performance that this writing style have versus this writing style. And Claude actually have that feature. I actually did a video. People loved it. That Claude now have that feature built in. My only if you don't mind, my only tiny piece of feedback from someone who obsesses over writing style guides, I think they could be a little more comprehensive for an enterprise use case. Like they're too short basically, but I still love them because I love being able to, again, what I love about Claude is I can flick between them, right? I was going through uploading this PDF, writing this, I'll try a different PDF. Now I can literally just flick between them. So I edit them myself and put them in. So that's, our audience know that one. So that's why I'm kind of going over. We've taught that one a lot and taught them how to do this Claude. The other one that I want to maybe just riff with you on, because it's another example of Claude doing the thing that you said, which is like ingesting data and then being able to do something for enterprises. And when you have writing styles, the other thing that an enterprise would really love is like audience segments, like these kind of audience style guides. And so what it would be able to do is take all of your unstructured data and then be able to say, well, this is your ideal customer profile. This is the kind of way that they consume content at the top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel. And the cool thing about Claude is it can basically take the unstructured data, create a first pass view, and again, just allow you to select now the writing style and the audience style guide. And I'm just curious, like, how do you even start to figure out what one you should focus on? Because there's so many different use cases. Like I give you an example of one that may or may not be interesting, but like, how do you decide like writing styles is the thing we should integrate? This is the thing we should integrate, because enterprise has such a plethora of different use cases across so many different functions.
It's a big challenge for an organization that's building something that's so broadly applicable, and we want it to be so broadly applicable to hit our vision, but it's also important to offer specificity to companies so that they understand and have a mental model for how they should adopt and use something. So this is something I think about a lot, and I previously worked at a company called Airtable, and that was very similar, where we were building a very flexible application building platform, and we saw this too. To me, there is this balance that exists where if you look at use cases, ultimately, a lot of them share some fundamental building blocks. And you can sort of think about this as like, we are building a Lego kit, and this Lego kit has like a combination of, one of the Legos is sort of like the knowledge that Claude has. One of the Lego kits is like its ability to augment or like the prompt around the outputs that it has. One of them is like the specific form factor of the output that you are getting. There are all of these Lego blocks that enterprises, though, are ultimately looking for, like the Millennium Falcon, right?
Yeah.
And there might be the Eiffel Tower or the Millennium Falcon or a particular like Lego kit. And we need to provide to people good jumping off points to understand how you can pull these primitives together to actually accomplish the specific thing that you're trying to do, like achieve the Millennium Falcon. And in many instances, it also might require building like the piece that is also specific to the Millennium Falcon kit, right?
Right.
So if you're an engineer, like you can't just have a generic integration that, the document repository might be necessary but insufficient for you to write a lot of code. You also might need the GitHub integration. And that is like a primitive that is largely just ingesting context, but it's doing it specifically for engineers. And that looks more like the Chewbacca Lego piece that's going in the Millennium Falcon Lego kit. So I think for us, it is going to be about making sure that we're building the right primitives that we think are horizontally applicable, that can be applied to a lot of use cases, but making them composable enough to bundle them together to be really meaningful for specific audiences. And we only understand which audiences we should be really solving for based on feedback with customers. And that's why partnering with enterprise is so important, because you have this direct line of feedback. I am in shared Slack channels with these people where I can answer their questions and see what they're trying to do. And then that shortens the loop from me being like, okay, this is how we need to bundle this. This is what templates we should provide. This is what specific integrations we should provide, or specific flavors of building blocks that we should provide to people to then get them to solve a very specific use case. So that's a little bit of how I think about it. I still think we're a long way to go, though, on pulling these things together into a connected experience with better starting points that can address the cold start problem that you were talking about. I think right now we've done a pretty good job, in my opinion, of starting to build the right layer, the right foundational layer, but we have not done a good enough job yet of connecting these things in a way that people feel like they can start and really understand, like, how do I solve this for content generation, for marketing, like right, in a way that's accessible on the first time that you see it.
Yeah. So that makes a total sense, because you're really trying to figure out, like, what are the building blocks of enterprise? Like, how does enterprise work get done? And then probably have a product that's flexible enough that if you have the building blocks, you can then create the nuance that you need to apply them to your function. And there's a spectrum, right? Like, there's probably a spectrum of like least complex to most complex, in that if you're an engineer, it's somewhat more easier to say, like, we just need to be a great coding assistant. I'm sure there's like more to it, but like, you kind of know what an engineer is trying to do day in, day out. Whereas a marketer can be doing a spectrum of different things. So like from product marketing to like email marketing to all these different things. And so like, there's a way harder to decipher, like, what are the core building blocks there. And so I'm curious, as we kind of get into the cold start problem that I would love to talk about, is, are you to begin with prioritizing any kind of specific functions in enterprise, or just like enterprise in and of itself? Like, how do you even start to prioritize where to start?
A lot of this comes back to where we have seen early success and where we get pulled to inside of the enterprise and business context. And I think about a few that get me very excited just based on the really positive feedback that we've seen. I think software engineering is obviously one that has been really successful for us. I think if you look at the discussion around Claude 3.5 Sonnet and how amazing it is at coding, that is an area that we continue to be really excited about, and we have a lot of customer demand and love for. But alongside that, we've seen a lot more use cases starting to take off within business. I think content generation for marketing specifically, like marketing content generation on different channel specific marketing channels where you're internationalizing it in multiple different countries. This is like a repeatable use case that we've seen and gotten really excited about. This is less of a job function, but it is more of a way of working. People who are analyzing information within their businesses and using that to create recommendations or strategies or outputs. This could be people who are in accounting. This could be people who are in strategic finance. These could be consultants. This could be operations professionals. The shape of what they do is actually quite similar, though. Like, they're pulling together a lot of disparate information, analyzing and synthesizing that information, and providing recommendations or outputs or models based on that. And the inputs are very different, right? It could be, stuff that you're getting from the internet. It could be stuff that you're getting from financial models internally. It could be your own existing enterprise data on how people are using your product, or it could be account research. But ultimately, the shape of what they're doing is very similar. That is another one. And then sales, I think, is actually another one that I'm super excited about, which actually interestingly follows a similar shape that we've seen, where people are finding a lot of information about their, accounts. They're creating strategies to target these specific accounts and how to, go after them. Then they are, of course, meeting with those customers, managing those communications, and then downstream, like they of course have to work with their CRMs, like HubSpot, in order to actually make sure that they're driving visibility and repeatability in their business. And we're excited also to explore this space and how we can help. We don't want to replace any systems of record. That's not what we want to do, but we do want to help people work better with their systems of record.
Yeah. Yeah. What's like really interesting is when you start to really think about AI and jobs is like, again, all jobs are a series of tasks. And when you start to apply AI to different jobs, you realize that the roles are separated into different functions because of like domain expertise that you would apply to the same set of tasks. But if you don't need the domain expertise because AI has the domain expertise, then you actually start to figure out that a lot of these roles can just be aggregated into the same role, because if they have AI, they're able to just change the inputs. They have domain expertise of the AI, and they do the same series of tasks. And the other thing I'm thinking about as you're kind of talking about the different use cases, the thing that I find like really hard to figure out, or I would find really hard if I was in your shoes, is what does Claude, like what do you build versus what do you not, like what do you want people to build on top of Claude? Because like I think I looked at Claude's revenue, and what's like really interesting about Claude is a lot of your revenue is coming from API. There's a ton of API usage. Like how do you, as a product leader, again, it's such a broad set of things you could build for, but then there's all of these other companies wanting to build on Claude. And so how do you think about the balance between what you all build and then what you're happy for other developers and builders to build on top of Claude?
Like my vision for Claude is, again, that it can be this virtual collaborator that can help you understand the context around your world, communicate with you in ways as you would a collaborator that you work with today, and capable of helping you do things and act on your behalf, which ultimately means helping work in the systems that exist today.
Yeah.
And so in many instances, it's not about competing or replacing the systems that exist today and where people are working. It's about complementing and making you work better with those systems, with the information that underlies those systems. So I think about it as like, we want to be a place where you go to work with all of this. But at the same time, I think offering choice is quite important. We have choice in the sense of we're available through Claude AI. We're also available through our API, and different companies are going to have different considerations around the solution that they want. An example of this is maybe something like HIPAA compliance, right? If we're not at the stage of being HIPAA compliant as a product, but you want to build a knowledge repository of patient information for doctors to create notes. This is just a hypothetical example. Claude AI probably is not the solution that you want for that, to use for that. But because we have an API, you can now, and it's available on something like Bedrock, you can now build an on-prem service that leverages our API to manage how your doctors are writing notes using our API. So I think choice allows the market to select based on a number of different criteria, where they are in terms of their maturity and their stance on security, compliance, administration, their cost, considerations, and the frontier of what they want to build. It allows them to mix and match different solutions that we can provide because we offer choice. We have some companies where for a subset of their use cases, they might want to build something in-house on our API. But then for a broader set of knowledge worker use cases, they're super excited to adopt Claude AI. So I think we always want Claude AI to be the place where people can start. But the reality is that there are specific systems of record, very deep workflows that we're cognizant that we never want to replace, but we want Claude to help you start those things, interact with those things, understand those things more effectively, and it should be able to do that. But if you have a very deep domain-specific thing that you're trying to get done, it might make sense to build into a point solution. Or if you have a specific stance on security and compliance, you might want to do it there. Or if it's too expensive to do this, you might want to build it yourself. These are all sort of the dynamics or things that why it's helpful to offer choice.
Yeah, 100%. One of the things our listeners will definitely be asking me is, hey, like, how do I use Claude in the same way? Like a lot of people want to know, like, how do you get using it every day like I do? Like it's the cold start problem, right? Because you worked in Airtable, I worked in Zapier. Both of those companies likely had such a variety of ways that you could start people. So when you're trying to figure out, oh, what do I onboard this person onto? How do I get them to activate? AI is like magnitudes of order of greater than that, because it's like whatever you want to do. And so, part of your, I guess, challenge will be, how do I get people in companies using AI more? What are some things that you're thinking about to get people into the usage every day, every week, every day of Claude and AI?
I think it looks different for individuals who are adopting something versus people who exist in a business and are coming into a place where there is already like an architecture of how other people are using the system. I think that there are some commonalities between them, though. I think a lot of Claude AI ends up being around a combination of context and intent. What is the information that you're working with to try to do something? What does Claude need to understand? And then what is your intent with how it's going to use that information to do something on your behalf? There's also something interesting where you can infer intent from context in many instances. Like if you have enough context, then you can say, here are some good starting points for things that you could do if your intent was X, Y, and Z. So I think something to me that I think about is how can Claude, in both the business context and the personal context, even if you want to adopt it and start using it for work, how can it get the necessary context from you in terms of what is timely and relevant or top of mind to then provide inspiration for you on how it can use that context to get something done for you, to make your life easier, to accomplish a task that might be timely and relevant. So that is one way that I think about it. In businesses, a lot of that context already exists, right? You've already adopted Claude. You might have a bunch of projects. You might have a bunch of ways that other people have used it. And I think there it's about surfacing valuable things that other people have done who might be relevant to you based on what your function is, what kind of information you work with, and giving you just the jumping off point to say, let me just click a button, understand, learn, and then build a repeatable habit or loop out of that. For an individual where a lot of that structure doesn't exist already, I think it's about understanding the basic foundations of them and their goals and what they're trying to accomplish and the world and the context within they are doing that so that we can formulate a recommendation about how they should start based on the intent that we're able to infer.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's basically like the more you can get people to add context, the more valuable those suggestions are going to be, whether you're in a HubSpot and it's able to suggest things to you, or you're in another app, or you can actually give it a bunch of your previous content and it can write something very similar. Like in terms of the user experience there, do you think that user experience is always going to be, oh, I have to remember to jump back to Claude and go into my like assistant, or have you aren't really thinking through that problem, or like do you think that happens in the workflow in some way? Like how do you think about how the user experience looks for that?
And I think this is something that we're earlier on, but we are thinking about a lot. And I think if you look at things like computer use and the sort of like API that we released earlier this year around that, I think there is something to be said
Scott,
about.
Could you just, for the listeners, explain what that is? Because they might not know what you can do with
absolutely. So computer use is this interesting model capability that's available in an early sort of preview via our API, which allows Claude to take screenshots on your computer, identify coordinates, and then click on those coordinates based on the task that you're trying to accomplish. So if I say I want to go and search for something that I can buy on Amazon or something, I want to find a particular object, I can ask Claude to do it. It can then control the environment, navigate to the browser, open the browser, look for Amazon, and then click on those coordinates. It's still very early, but that's the kind of thing where you can imagine right now Claude AI is really existing in this web application. Who knows in the future if it has access to more of those capabilities. It does change the form factor of how you think about where it is in your life. I do think about Claude AI right now as being the place where a lot of people go back to, and we do want to make it easier to reach for things like our desktop application, things like our mobile application. Making those continually more accessible, I think, will be important. But I do think meeting people where they are is crucial. And that might mean in other point solutions. It might mean on your desktop. It might mean while you're walking and you want to speak to it. We do want to make it easier to reach for in those instances. And we also want to eventually make Claude more proactive in reaching to you when it needs to,
right.
To make that also easier based on the context and the content that it has. So I think that will be important for us.
Yeah, that would be huge. Like if I can imagine, maybe I'm off base here in that it already can do this in some way, but the fact that I think at some point the AI assistants, and we're specifically talking about Claude, so we'll stick to Claude, but we'll be able to like automate a bunch of the work, and the way that I suspect it will do that, if you're a knowledge worker today, most of your work is happening in browsers, and so if it can capture what you're doing day in day out, it can probably suggest workflows that it can build and automate for you. And I think, in that case, you have to capture that information. But I do agree as well that it should be its own destination. And I can see like Claude is doing a good job because you have projects, you have artifacts, but it definitely for me is the big unlock for me is when you can integrate it. Let's say I can have it integrated into like Slack and email and all these different comms channels, and I can just tell me what to do. Like, what is my unread Slack? What is like, hey, these are the things you have to do today, Kieran. I like that sounds so simplistic. That is like the most impactful thing you can do for B2B knowledge workers is collate all of the comms, parse it and structure it, and then prioritize it. And I would say like every singular person would be 10 times happier in their job if they could do that stuff and they could focus on the work. And so like, I think that's like one incredible use case that I'm sure at some point will be available in Claude.
This goes back to that pillar I talked about on Claude understanding. Like you can really only prioritize the information for someone if you have access to the information. And so we're very excited for Claude to continue to get more information about you and your world, and also merging it with your personal preferences so that it can then create more tailored recommendations of what it can do for you using all of that information. And so that's absolutely something that I'm excited about. I definitely have maybe 65 unread Slack messages right now. And so prioritizing that is going to be a tough thing for me. My entire commute is always just that. I do a commute. I live about an hour away from San Francisco, and on the train here, on the train home, all it is clearing out the communications backlog to then prioritize how I need to be communicating with other people. So it is a huge challenge for me.
Yeah. Same. It's huge. This is awesome, Scott. I'm going to end with some really self-serving things, and you can ask them or not, because I am a Power Claude user, and I'm going to ask you for some things. And then you can tell me, I can't tell you anything, or we're not doing it, or just like, that's fine. Is Claude going to connect to the web? It's really the only time I really have to leave it is I'm trying to do something and it doesn't have up-to-date information. And again, because you're building for the enterprise, it may not be as important to you all, but I'm curious if you're able to share anything there or not.
Yeah, I think connecting to the web means lots of different things. It could mean searching. It could mean making it easier for you to give it links. So I think this is something we're considering, we're excited about.
I think artifacts is one of the coolest feature you all launched. Then you launched the ability to publish artifacts publicly, which is so cool because like I have none geeky friends, right? And I shared Claude's analysis of this clean energy fund with my friend who does invest and doesn't really understand the value of AI. And I sent him one of the artifacts that I published on Claude. He's not an AI user. He can look at it. He's like, what? I was like, how long did it take you to do that? I was like, Claude built me charts, forecasted things, predictive models. I was like, I'm literally watching TV and this took me 3 minutes. He's like, okay, signing up for an account, right? So like, there's like good virality there. One of the things that would be really useful is I like some sort of easier interface to flick between artifacts and version control for artifacts, because you're kind of like I'm going up and down the chat, remembering the different ones to click on. So that would be super cool. That's a very self-serving point. But they were like my two things. I truly believe that, OpenAI copied you guys with Canvas. There's a ton of things that I see other companies trying to integrate. The thing I think Claude is getting right is just there's these like really cool features. Like projects was a cool feature, artifacts was a cool feature, publish into the web was a cool, being able to publish your artifacts, such a cool feature. I think you've built an incredible product. It's really exciting to have you on, having actually someone on who's built a product that it has been really impactful for my life, has been really impactful, I suspect, for listeners' lives. And I just can't wait to see what you all launch next year. So appreciate you coming on, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was awesome.
This data is wrong every freaking time.
Have you heard of HubSpot? HubSpot is a CRM platform where everything is fully integrated.
Whoa, I can see the client's whole history, calls, support tickets, emails, and here's a task from 3 days ago I totally missed.
HubSpot. Grow better.